Good morning.
Good morning.
Church, this year is a special year for St. Andrew's. We are celebrating our 150th anniversary of the laying of the foundation stone of the first building. To put that into some perspective, the first parishioners gathered around on this ground. The world moved at the speed of a horse-drawn carriage. Letters took weeks to cross the ocean, and life was measured not by the nanosecond of the click of the smartphone, but by the slow, deliberate turning of the seasons. And yet, here we are in 2026. We live in an era of instant gratification. We want high-speed internet. We demand overnight delivery. And we want instant solutions to complex problems. If a website takes longer than 3 seconds to load, we become impatient. And yet our scriptures today drops us into a completely different rhythm of reality. They invite us into the slow, agonizing, beautiful territory of radical patience. As we celebrate 150 years of ministry this year, our text challenges us to ask, what does it mean to wait on God's timing? How did those who came before endure? How do we faithfully step into the next chapter when the world around us is demanding immediate results? As a priest who steps into a new ministry context, some of these questions weigh heavily on our shoulders. Sometimes there's an expectation for immediate results that result in people sitting in the pews. Sometimes the expectation is that we see our bottom line increased for the better immediately. I will admit, sometimes I tend to be a bit impatient and want to charge forward. Let us look first at our gospel to hear what Jesus is saying. Jesus tells a story that any gardener or farmer understands all too well. A man sows good seed, but an enemy sneaks in at night and scatters the seeds of weeds. And in this instance, specifically a weed called darnel. It is a weed that in its early stages looks exactly like wheat. When the plants sprout, the mess becomes visible. The servants are horrified. They suffer from the same affliction that plagues most of us. They want to immediately fix it. They run to the master and say, "Do you want us to go and pull them up right now?" It's a deeply human response. When we see something wrong, whether it's evil in the world, conflict in our church, or brokenness in our own lives, our immediate instinct is to grab our own gardening gloves, march into the field, and start ripping things out. We want to force a perfect harvest now. We want to separate the good from the bad on our own terms. But look at the response of the master. It is a very firm no. Why? As any gardener here, particularly gardener here, will know that the roots of weeds and the plants that you are trying to grow become intertwined. If they rush in their desire to fix the problem, the servants would end up destroying the very harvest that they are trying to protect. In their rush to pull the weeds out, they would inevitably also pull out the wheat. The master commands him to do the hardest thing imaginable for an anxious human being. Let both of them grow together until harvest. In other words, wait. This is exactly where the Apostle Paul meets us in his letter to the Romans. Paul does not sugarcoat reality. He doesn't pretend that waiting is easy or comfortable. In fact, he uses the word groaning. He says that all creation is groaning as if in labor pains. We ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, are also groaning inwardly. Waiting on God is not a passive time of daydreaming. It is the hard work of holding on to hope when the world feels messy, tangled, and incomplete. Paul writes, "But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently." I might need reminders to be patient. I am a product of the culture wanting things now. But when we think of the 150-year history of this parish, and when we think about the generations that sat in these pews before us, and we are reminded that they lived through the anxieties of the 19th century, the devastating global conflicts of the 20th century, economic depressions, pandemics, and deep cultural shifts. There must have been moments in this church's history where the servants looked at the cultural field and said, "Lord, everything is tangled. The weeds are taking over. Shouldn't we just pull it all up? Is it even worth continuing?" I think it's important that we take note that it's quite common to have those thoughts, particularly when we are faced with cultural challenges, declining numbers, and other challenges that come to every church. Those thoughts in and of themselves are quite natural for us to have. But we look at the ancestors of this church. They did not quit. They did not force a premature harvest. They understood that the faithfulness of a church is not measured by immediate, flashy success, but by long-term, gritty endurance. They kept sowing the good seed. They kept baptizing, marrying, burying, feeding the hungry, and praying the liturgy, trusting that God was at work in the soil, even when the weeds seemed overwhelming. So my question today, this week, as I wrote this, was, what does this look like for us today as we step forward into our 151st year next year? It means to some degree, not to some degree, it means relinquishing the role of the judge. In Matthew's parable, the servants are not the ones who harvest, the angels are. When we spend all of our energy trying to police the world, trying to prematurely decide who is in and who is out, or panicking over the state of the culture, we are trying to do God's job. Radical patience allows us to look at this messy world and say, we do not have to fix everything today. God is the master of the harvest. Our job is to simply be the healthy wheat. I think also that patience means trusting in the hidden growth. My first post-secondary education was at Kemptville College, which has now been eaten up by Guelph. I studied horses, to be clear. But we were forced to take at least one credit from horticulture. I don't like plants. It takes too long to grow them. But I learned some truths. Some of these may seem silly. Plants do not grow faster if you stand over them and tell them to grow faster. Growth happens from the seed in the dark place. Seeds need dark place, whether it's soil or substrate or even paper towel if you're trying to determine the germination rate. Most seeds will not germinate on top of the soil. There are some that will, but it's a very small percentage. We need the dark places in order to grow. Over the last 150 years, the deepest work of this parish hasn't always been big anniversary celebrations. It has been the quiet bedside prayers of people who are ill and those who are passing. It has been the small acts of charity. It has been the Sunday school lessons taught to children, to those who grew up to be leaders of this church. It is the steady, quiet presence of God's people in the community of Alliston. I spent the last week and a half doing quite a bit of deep diving on the history, not only of St. Andrews, but also of Alliston. Our roots are entangled. Alliston grew at the same rate that St. Andrews grew. It has been slow growth, and it was always in God's timing. As we look forward to the next 50, 100, 150 years, we must confess that the field we are called to labor in is still complicated. The weeds of injustice, of division, of anxiety are all around us, and we might feel tempted to groan. But Paul reminds us that our groaning is not the rattling of an empty cage. It is the labor pain of something new being born. Our present struggles are not even worth comparing to the glory of what is to be revealed. Jesus ends his explanation of the parable with a glorious promise. He says that at the end of the age, when the sorting is done, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Church, you are all part of this 150-year-old tapestry that is St. Andrews. We are the fruit of the seeds planted by people who never lived to see this morning, but they trusted that God would bring increase. I believe that we are called to honor this legacy by not demanding instant answers tomorrow, but by stepping into the field with a radical and unshakable patience. I believe that we are called to keep on loving the people here in Alliston, to keep serving one another and the community, to keep praying for the people who worship here and for those in our community. And I think sometimes the most difficult thing we are called to do is to trust God in his timing, to tend the soil, and to let God bring about the harvest in his perfect time, and not in